new kingdom. Majestic temples line the landscape, and they too, like the pyramids of Giza, have become enduring symbols from the civilization's ancient past. Some of the most impressive were constructed during Ramses' reign, like the one known today as Abu Simbel. Abu Simbel is the largest rock-cut temple ever built. There, 4 seated statues of Ramses rise 66 feet into the air.
Size equals prominence in Egyptian art. So it made every bit of sense for Ramses to show himself larger than anybody else had up until then. And he did it throughout the land. And you can imagine, again, in the far-flung outposts like Abu Simbel, as you sail along the river and come by these tall statues of Ramses, that there would have been no doubt in your mind that here was a god.
In ancient Egypt, the king was a divine being. It was his job to serve as the intermediary between the gods and the people. It was perhaps the pharaoh's most important responsibility as a living god to maintain order within the civilization, and Ramses seemed to take the role of deity quite seriously. Behind the 4 seated statues, a temple was tunneled 160 feet into the mountain. Inside, 8 Ramses figures, carved in the image of the king of the dead, Osiris, guard a corridor. This corridor ends in a sacred room. Within the sacred room, there are statues of the great gods of Egypt, and Ramses sits among them.
He actually made a correction and added a figure of himself in a row with other gods, and Ramses the king worships Ramses the god. It's a very interesting image. Other kings had certainly been deified after their demise, or had been deified by other kings, or had hinted at their deification, but nobody, to my knowledge, did it as blatantly as Ramses.
Throughout Egypt, countless numbers of Ramses statues can still be found. They were a necessary part of everyday life. In ancient times, they served as the proxies for a pharaoh that would actually be seen by very few, but worshipped by all.
He embodied the corporate nature of the society and his subjects. So there is that to him. I think it's wrong to look upon Pharaoh as a tyrant pushing down on the people. He much more represents the aspirations of the people coming up this way, and he embodied this concept of the society as a divine entity, in a sense. And he represents the population before the gods.
If Egypt served the gods were bound to do right by Egypt. They should send wonderful Nile floods, rich harvests, prosperity. This was the aim. One gives, the other gives. So that was the whole ethos of the Egyptian religion. If the gods were properly served, if people were obedient and upright, the gods were bound, morally if you like, to help Egypt, to bless Egypt, to bring prosperity.
Ramses II, the god, may have been viewed as larger than life by his subjects, but Ramses II, the man, wanted much more than divine status. Coming up next, Ramses the warrior fights for his homeland and agrees to sign the very first peace treaty in the history of man. During the first 3 years of his reign, Ramses II lived a quiet life. He focused his attention on the construction of big buildings, the usurping of monuments from previous pharaohs, and carving and recarving hieroglyphs and reliefs throughout the land. Scholars claim that within the ancient inscriptions created during his lifetime, there are clues that offer insight into the man behind the mystery.
It is very hard to get at what Pharaoh is like as a personality. We do have some texts which the suspicion is that he might have been referred to as the general or the generalissimo rather than as Pharaoh, which would mean that he was thought of as more of a part of us, you know, as a troop leader, and maybe with a little bit less emphasis on his divine nature.
Ramses as pharaoh did not set out on his first military campaign until year 5 of his reign. In 1286 BC, Ramses, intent on gaining complete control of the west coast of the Mediterranean, began his expedition, and his efforts proved to be a success. He and his troops returned home victorious, having gained control of both the Mediterranean coast and an area of land that had once been under Egyptian rule, but had been lost to the powerful Hittite Empire. The Hittites, like the Egyptians, had well-developed military skills, making them worthy foes. Ramses' invasion into their lands caused considerable tension between the two countries. Within a year, both superpowers were poised for a fight. The ensuing confrontation, known as the Battle of Kadesh, would become one of the most celebrated and well-recorded moments during Ramses' reign.
All the foreign lands trembled before him, their chiefs bringing their tribute, and all the rebels coming in homage through the dread of his majesty's might. Ancient Egyptian inscription.
Each version, of course, a little bit different, but always Ramses, the god king, is the hero.
Exactly who told the truth about the Battle of Kadesh is still unknown, but fortunately, the events were recorded by both sides. Experts claim somewhere within the two accounts, the truth can be found. Ramses had separated his troop of 20,000 men into 4 units. The advanced force had captured what they considered to be 2 Hittite spies. These supposed spies were actually planted by the Hittites to misinform the Egyptians. They told the Egyptians that the Hittites, afraid of the Egyptian army, were well over 100 miles away. Ramses, believing their story, feared no trouble from the enemy. So he continued leading his first unit into an area close to Kadesh. While setting up camp, the Egyptians were given some terrifying news. The Hittites' real location was less than 2 miles away. Ramses was wild with anger.
So, the enemy are hiding round old Kadesh, and neither my foreign chieftains nor my Egyptian officers with them knew anything about it. Ramses II.
The remainder of Ramses' forces were miles away when the Hittites attacked. But in the end, they would arrive on the scene just in time to save their leader. The rest of the story is somewhat sketchy. 3,500 years later, it is still difficult to be certain of the chain of events after the Egyptian reinforcements appeared by Ramses' side. But experts feel, after studying the documents from both the Hittites and the Egyptians, they have a pretty good idea.
Now, to read his description of it, you would think that this was one of the cleverest forms of strategy, that he had this all figured out and that he told them all to wait and come in just at the right moment. We have, however, a Hittite version of the same battle, and it doesn't come out quite the same way.
I think we can detect very well what happened. He was riding straight into the jaws of defeat and even death, and by bravery and being saved by the people coming in, he won the day on the field in those few hours. And that was it. That's as far as he got. He didn't get Kadesh. He didn't drive out the Hittites. They didn't drive him out. But he'd have to go home licking his wounds. So it was very much a draw for both countries.
Whether or not Ramses' account of the battle was truthful was merely secondary to the importance of how he presented himself to the gods. By carving his courageous version of the story on many of his temple walls, he was trying to prove to the many Egyptian deities that he was worthy of his powerful position as king of an empire, even if in the end, Ramses would be unable to defeat the Hittites.
Got some very seasoned soldiers on the throne of the Hittites. When the Hittites said, look, we will make peace, isn't it sensible? Ramses was getting nowhere after 15 and 20 years of war, so it finally dawned on him, he was a bit stubborn, that he wasn't going to get anywhere in beating Hittite Empire. Then he made peace, then you had a golden age of peace for several generations.
Later, this declaration of peace would be cemented with a marriage. Ramses II would take a Hittite princess as a wife, as evidence of his good intentions. However, his new bride would be only one of many. Next, exactly what drove the pharaoh into the beds of countless women, and why? Even today, it's impossible to travel through Egypt without witnessing the many works created during Ramses II's time. The many grand monuments project the image of his power. The inscriptions and reliefs describe his determination to maintain his civilization. And the temple walls well record the pride he felt for his many children.
Ramses had this enormous family, and I think he was very fond of female company. He enjoyed his sex life, I suspect. There's no other way of seeing it. He has 2 chief queens at a time.
As far as we know, there are more names of queens recorded for Ramses than there are for any other Egyptian monarch. I think I can say that unequivocally, because he outlived so many of them too. You see, there'd be one for a while, and then all of a sudden she'd be gone, and there'd be another one, and there was Ramses going valiantly on to the future.
Ramses II survived several of his concubines, and both lesser and chief queens. During his lifetime, he had over half a dozen principal wives, but one seems to stand out beyond all the rest. Her name was Nefertari. According to various ancient documents and monuments, Nefertari was Ramses' most well-loved wife. Her beauty was legendary. Ramses seemed to honor her by making her presence known throughout his empire. At Abu Simbel, next to his massive temple, there is another. This one was dedicated to both the Egyptian goddess Hathor and Ramses' beloved wife. There, 2 idealized carvings portray the image of Nefertari, while 4 other statues of her devoted husband stand by her side. Nefertari bore Ramses many sons, but none survived him, and neither did his favorite queen. Around the 24th year of his reign, Ramses mourned the death of Nefertari. His devotion to her memory is best seen within the confines of her final resting place, found in the area known as the Valley of the Queens. "40 feet below the Earth's surface is her beautifully decorated 5,600 square foot tomb. Her mummy had long since disappeared, but thanks to conservation efforts by both the Egyptian Antiquities Organization and the Getty Conservation Institute of Los Angeles, many of the painted reliefs have been repaired or restored. According to the Egyptian religion, the various scenes upon the tomb walls were necessary for achieving eternal life, and most likely, Ramses II would have wanted Nefertari to safely journey to the other side in hopes of someday meeting her again in a world beyond. Despite the loss of Nefertari, Ramses II never stopped performing his duties as pharaoh. It was important, as the king of an empire, that he continue procreating to ensure upon his death that he would be followed by one of his own sons.